You were blessed in a way I wasn't blessed. Obviously, with my parents immigrating here to the United States and raising me Muslim, and my father building a mosque in Columbus, Ohio, we were raised to be Muslims. And if you want to say, well, tell me in one sentence, what does that statement mean? It means Islam is the complete rejection of Christianity. It's complete, and let me show you what I mean.
As I mentioned last week, we are going to discuss the 3 worldviews that we have been working through for our compare-contrast papers. Hopefully, you have been thinking through those even more specifically. Remember we watched Dr. Caner's story on Huckabee last week, so we have him here with us, which is incredible. And then Dr. Davis, who you know, and Dr. Weaver, you know as well. You can come on up, and we will jump right into talking through each worldview as you consider the worldview you've selected. Be paying close attention, obviously, the entire time. I shouldn't have to say that. But specifically, as we discuss the worldview about what you're writing, because I think it's going to kind of broaden your understanding and also help you as you're looking for sources. They're going to mention some online sources. I will pull those up in our next period. You have me for 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock. Isn't that just, you've just made your Wednesday. So don't ask a question, can you repeat your sources? Because I'll have those up on the PowerPoint in the next one. So we have quite a bit to discuss, so let's get started. Okay, Dr. Caner, I think you are the first one. And my first question is, what's the difference between a worldview and a religion?
All right. You're going to get it from someone who taught philosophy for the first 6 years of college. And so, as you know, a religion is part of a worldview, but a worldview doesn't necessarily involve religion. So what I want you to do as you're thinking about these papers is thinking about 4 different arenas of a worldview. A worldview encompasses the theological. It can be religious or irreligious. Your worldview can be based on a text like the Quran or the Vedas or the Scripture. That's the theological. The second aspect is the philosophical. Philosophical is this question that you ask about anything in your life. Is it true or not? And how do I base a truth? Is the truth based inside of myself or outside of myself? Is the truth above myself? Is it relative? Is it moral? Is it objective? That's the philosophical side of it after the theological. The third part of worldview is what I call the I questions. It's anthropological. It's about you. Where do you come from? Where are you going? Those are the questions that are more personal in nature that you have to answer. And then finally, the more personal is the experiential. It's the question that Nancy Pearcey asked, how must then I live? And that question plays out to what worldview is. Ultimately, worldview is what you do in life because you're thinking through it and your actions will demonstrate your beliefs. I've always told my students, when you're looking at politics, when you're looking at philosophy, it doesn't matter. Don't listen as much to what they say as what they do, because in what they do, you'll see what really they're saying.
So that should have brought up a reminder of your definition paper and the thesis that you were supporting, that it's ultimately about how you're living. Great. Dr. Davis, could you describe postmodernism and then its main differences from a biblical worldview?
All right. Post means after. Modernism is the root idea, and so before we answer what postmodernism is, it might be good to know what other forms of modernism would be, such as the pre-modern era, which people might say is from the very beginning up to about AD 1750, and at that point, when you think in terms of truth, people living during that period of time, for the most part, would think in terms of truth is revealed. It's revealed by an ultimate authority, by God, and as a result, you can be certain because obviously the Creator God is going to be telling you the truth. And the type of individual that might hold that position would be Moses in the Old Testament, Paul in the New Testament, and as we follow that position as born-again Christians, that gives us certitude, that we're certain that we're given proper revelation. Then the modern period, which they might date from about 1750 up into the mid-20th century, gets impacted by the Enlightenment period, by the scientific method, inductive reasoning, which is the basis of the scientific method. A lot of this started with René Descartes, French mathematician and philosopher. He's the guy, we talked about it in class, who said, "I think, therefore I am." And at that point, truth becomes something that you discover, and the emphasis shifts from the creator God who's going to reveal something to the discoverer who's going to figure things out. And as a result, there's not quite as much certitude because you're always doing experiments to make sure you're understanding things properly, but it's also very flattering. In other words, I'm the final authority. I can use my brain to figure these things out and come up with ultimate truth. Well, then we get to the postmodern period. I think we've all heard of existentialism. That actually goes way back into the 1700s with Soren Kierkegaard. But then moving up into the 1800s as liberalism moved into the different seminaries and graduate schools in Europe and North America, a real concern about belief in the supernatural to where they're now anti-supernatural. And philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche, Jean-Paul Sartre began to develop the idea that man is pretty much the final authority. There is no such thing as absolute truth. In fact, one of the individuals during that period of time made the famous statement, "There is no truth, but the truth that there is no truth." And at that point, truth then becomes something that man fashions, not just by himself, but in his cultural milieu. So worldviews, it kind of impacts even what a postmodernist is going to believe because it's kind of a communal sharing of ideas as to what that particular human thinks is ultimate truth. And that gets really scary because there are no absolutes, and particularly in the area of morality, there are no absolutes as a result. And so man becomes the measure of all things. He's the final authority. He calls the shots, and that's pretty scary.
So you sent me a few articles. Do you want to just, I'll pull those up in our next period, but do you want to just briefly explain?
Sure. You know, when we ask you to do a paper, and originally this was in the theology course, and so Mrs. Sewell's being very gracious to allow me to give some guidance in this area. We really want you to be researching recognized scholars. Right. And the problem with the internet is there's all kinds of well-meaning people who might be very intelligent, and maybe even everything they say is actually true, but because it wasn't peer-reviewed. In other words, no other scholar has gone through their article or through their blog or what they posted to evaluate whether it is in the ballpark of what recognized scholars would believe in. And so we would encourage you to use the internet to get ideas, even Wikipedia to get ideas, but you never can trust Wikipedia as an authority because of the nature of the beast. And so what I'm going to have Mrs. Sewell put up on the board are a couple of journal articles that you can access that I know have been peer-reviewed, and also a way to do searches in those particular journals if you want to look up some other ideas. And then in your Logos software, there are searching capabilities, and particularly for postmodernism, you can look up postmodernism, you can look up existentialism, and then even as it impacts Christianity, the emerging church and the emergent church are phrases that if you search for that in your Logos library, it'll bring up articles that will help you with postmodernism.
Great. And again, I'll have those up on the PowerPoint in our next period. So Dr. Weaver, could you describe deism, compare it to a biblical worldview?
Yeah, so deism is the idea, general statement that the belief of a grand architect, if you will, or a supreme being creates the world and all the natural laws that govern it, and then withdraws from it and allows those natural laws to play out themselves in the world today. The watchmaker metaphor may be used here, where you have the person that created the watch, God being the watchmaker who created the details of it to make it function as he wanted it to function, but then allows the watch to function on its own. Some names used by deists for this supreme being is the grand architect, the first cause, the divine artist, and the God of nature. And so this is not the same as Christianity. The deist does not believe that the grand architect is the God of the Judeo-Christian belief system. They do not believe in a personal being that wants to have engagement with you as a created being of his. There's no desire on the part of the deist to know their supreme creator, or that supreme creator wants to know us. They do not believe in the supernatural, and so any means of revelation, so including prophets, right, burning bush, audible voice, all the certainly not Jesus. Jesus we call the Christ, and so they don't believe in a supernatural revelation from God, and therefore don't believe in the Old Testament scriptures, don't believe in the New Testament scriptures, don't believe in the Quran of Islam, don't believe in the Vedas of Hinduism, don't believe in Pali Canon of Buddhism. So there is no supernatural and no written record of God revealing himself to man. So to know God, the deist believes you need to study nature, creation. The best way to know God, the only way to know God, is to study science, study creation around us. And that there is no doctrinal statement for the deists. This became popular in the 17th and 18th centuries. But there is no particular doctrinal statement or even a religious leader per se. But that being said, Edward Herbert is believed to be the father of deism, and he had 5 basic points. The first point being that the grand architect is not the same as the Judeo-Christian God, and has not revealed himself outside of creation. But reason leads one to know that creator. So they believe that reason, natural laws, or logic, and watching the natural laws around us and creation causes us to, or should cause us to believe in the grand architect, although we can't know him personally. Second, Herbert believed that one should worship the grand architect. Third, he believed that worship of the grand architect took place by living a moral, ethical life. Of course, that's subjective. What is a moral, ethical life if there's no revelation from God? Fourth, he believed that repentance is required, and that repentance in his mind is the idea that you are going to live an ethical, moral life rather than a non-ethical, moral life. And fifthly, he believed in an afterlife, believe it or not. He believed in an afterlife and believed that there would be results for your actions in your present life. Your actions in your present life, you will be rewarded or penalized for it. A friend of mine who happens to be one of our adjunct faculty members for Word of Life Bible Institute internationally writes for Probe Ministries. He says it this way: what should be obvious by now is that deism was a derivative of Christianity. As one cleric of the day wrote, deism is what is left of Christianity after casting off everything that's particular to it. The deist is one who denies the divinity, denies the incarnation, denies the atonement of Christ and the work of the Holy Spirit, who denies the God of Israel and believes in the God of nature. Deism became popular, as I mentioned, in the 17th and 18th century, but there are some that would consider themselves deists or soft deists. I have a book here in my hand written by Anthony Flew, very popular and influential British atheist. And this book, he converted from atheism to theism, and he would say a soft deist is what he would say. And his book is entitled, There Is a God. The no is marked out because he was an atheist. How the world's most notorious atheist changed his mind. And the picture is of his head turned upside down. So the most prominent atheist of his time, before what we call the new atheists, but influential British philosopher came to the conclusion that he believes in a God, and he calls himself a soft deist, or a weak form of deism.
Okay, and then you sent some online sources to me as well. And you referred to Summit Ministries, which is that Sean McDowell?
He's the main spokesman for it.
And we read a Sean McDowell article last week. That's the 5 reasons you should study apologetics. So Summit Ministries is one that you recommended, and then you recommended a couple others. If you could just briefly touch on those.
So Pro Ministries is a ministry that we have a partnership. We appreciate their positions on certain things, and they have a lot of apologetical resources. And Pro Ministries has 2 articles by 2 adjunct faculty of ours, teach at our Bible institutes. Don Clausen writes an article entitled Deism and America's Founders. So a lot of times that issue comes to where our founders of America deists, and so he addresses that. So he defines deism and then addresses that question. And then also Kirby Anderson, who speaks at our lodge in the Pines, wrote an article entitled George Washington and Religion, but he deals with deism as well there.
Okay, Dr. Caner, could you briefly describe Islam and its main differences from a biblical worldview?
Briefly
Yeah.
describe Islam. Yes. If you guys come back
Sign
next
up for
year, I'll give you 10
second year,
hours.
yeah.
Now I'll give you 2 minutes. Let's do it this way. I asked this in class yesterday. I think it's a real good way to show you this. Raise your hand if you were raised in church. Raise your hand if you were raised in church and look around. That's most of you guys. It's most of you. You were blessed in a way I wasn't blessed. Obviously, with my parents immigrating here to the United States and raising me Muslim, and my father building a mosque in Columbus, Ohio, we were raised to be Muslims. And if you want to say, well, tell me in one sentence, what does that statement mean? It means Islam is the complete rejection of Christianity. It's a complete, and let me show you what I mean. Somewhere along the way, being blessed, being raised on Sunday mornings in church, Wednesday nights, revivals, VBSs, somewhere along the way you were taught John 3:16, right? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten, monogenes, right? Only begotten son. Here's what you will expect of Islam. Anything that you hold dear, you'll have the exact opposite in Islam. So if you have John 3:16, the holy book of Islam is known as the Quran. In chapter 112 and verse 3, it says, he begets not, nor is he begotten. There's none like him. Exact opposite. Along the way, towards where you came to Word of Life, the Lord called on you, like in Matthew 11:28, come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Chapter 35, verse 18 of the Quran, you got to bear your own burdens. No one can bear them for you. Exact opposite. Along the way, your recognition of your salvation happened because in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh. In the Quran, chapter 3, it says of Jesus, Allah says be, and he is. He's created, not creator. Along the way, you and I get to celebrate the 3 greatest words ever uttered in English language. He is risen. Except in Islam, chapter 4 and verse 157 says they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but was someone like him. Along the way, you recognize exactly what Peter said in Matthew chapter 16, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus' answer is, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. But in the Quran, chapter 5, verse 75, it says he's a mere messenger. And to call him the Son of God, chapter 19 and verse 88 of the Quran, is a thing most blasphemous. Chapter 98 and verse 6 of the Quran makes you the worst of all creatures and sends you to the lowest levels of hell. So when you see Islam, what you have to understand is that philosophical statement, it completely rejects what you and I hold dear. And it really is the only religion ever created that can actually say it snuffed out Christianity. Because that's what it did. After it expanded, it took out centers in Damascus and Alexandria and other places. It has been a war ever since. And if you really want to see it come down to its final say, I do a thing on Islamic eschatology, and if you compare the Islamic Jesus to the biblical Jesus, you'll see the exact opposite. The Islamic Jesus comes back to a minaret in a mosque on Mount Afik in Damascus, Syria. That's what they believe. He will come to Israel in a special place called Lydda, which is just south of the Tel Aviv airport. We'll battle the Antichrist and kill the Antichrist, and everyone will become Muslim, and they'll all declare together, Allahu Akbar. God is greatest. By the way, this same Islamic Jesus declares that there will be 7 years of peace and they'll conquer Rome. It is the exact opposite. And that the Antichrist that the Islamic Jesus will defeat will declare himself God, and Jews and women will follow him. It's as if Muhammad knew exactly what the scripture said and wrote the exact opposite words. And that's what you have for now 1.8 billion Muslims. By the time you are in a retirement age in 30, 40 years, 2.7 billion Muslims on earth.
Well, that was very brief for what you could have discussed. Could you explain the sources that you sent me earlier?
Yeah, and you'll see this next hour. If you go, this is one of the things where we tell you it's not only that internet sources can't be trusted, it's that the internet itself tries to stop you from seeing sources. If you go to Google, they will push every liberal source to the top and pray you don't go to pages 5, 6, 7, or 8. That is purposeful to it. So if you type in stuff on Islam, the first thing you'll pop up is Islamophobia. Have you ever noticed there's not Christophobia or Buddhist phobia? There's only Islamophobia. That's intentional. They win the verb game, they win the game. So here's some trusted sources that I use. Answering-islam.org is a great source. It's written in a myriad of languages, not just English. You can get it in Spanish and Indonesian, et cetera, so that it's a great source from a myriad of scholars who push into there. Answering-islam.org is a great website that you can use. If you want to know how to witness to a Muslim and have some good source underneath there, Billy Graham Evangelistic Association has an article that's titled How to Witness to Muslims that does a really good job as well. If you're looking for books to use, Answering Islam by Norman Geisler and Abdul Salib is fantastic. Seeking Allah and Finding Jesus by Nabil Qureshi, who died at the age of 34 a few years ago of stomach cancer. Brilliant book as it is, and a host of other books that can go along with it.
A host of other books like Unveiling Islam, right?
You said that. I didn't. I'm not going to. It's okay.
Norman Geisler, that should ring a bell. You also had to cite his work in your definition paper. So be making those connections with quality sources. Dr. Weaver, so we've discussed postmodernism, deism, Islam. Both of these worldviews seem to kind of reject a God head in the sense of the God creator that we would worship. What's the flaw of deism? Because if you briefly look at it, it kind of seems like, oh, there's a creator. Yeah, I believe that. So what's the main flaw in what they're believing?
Well, they want to take the moral and ethical teachings of the Bible and strip away everything else, right? So it's interesting that deism wants you to live a moral and ethical life, but rips away everything that's foundational to it. But I would say, as you're studying the book of Romans this week, right, with Dr. Cohn, Romans talks about general revelation, that we look around, we see creation around us, it points to a creator. We have the moral knowledge of right and wrong, which points to a creator, but that's not enough. Okay, that's just enough to condemn us, Romans 1-2, but not enough to save us. So we need the special revelation of the person of Jesus Christ. Otherwise, it's of no value. So it can only condemn, but it can't save. So we need the revelation of Jesus Christ. We need the message of the Old and New Testament.
Okay. Dr. Davis, what is the potential of postmodernism affecting our biblical worldview? In other words, what red flags should we be aware of in our thinking?
Right. When I was defining postmodernism, I mentioned that idea that there is no truth, but the truth that there is no truth. And obviously, both for secular philosophy and secular society, and then as that starts to come into the church, that's very dangerous when you undermine your foundations for truth. One of the things I didn't mention during the last sequence is that within postmodernism, they not only were not considering there to be absolute truth, they were not only trying to form their own truth, but in many cases, they were encouraging people to have an intuitive sense of truth. In other words, it became very mystical, the approach to truth. Now, I mentioned the emerging and the emergent church. That is where postmodernism as a philosophy begins to come in and impact the church. And that's been going on now for the last 15 or 20 years. Let me just read one man's definition of the emerging church. An emphasis on affections and feelings over against rational linear thought, on experience over truth, on inclusion rather than exclusion, on the corporate over the individualistic. Tolerance is the principal virtue, as nothing is more indicative of the mentality of modernism than telling someone they are wrong, either intellectually, doctrinally, or morally. And as a result, the Christians that get swept up in the postmodern movement put a lot of emphasis on being friends and socializing and encouraging one another, but not criticizing. No iron sharpening iron. Your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth, and we don't want to insult each other. That's a real danger. And then the other thing that I haven't been able to statistically check out myself, but apparently this one article I was reading, a lot of the churches that move into the emergent area, they like this idea of the mysticism to the point where they will have a very dark meeting room when they have their church services because that aids in the mysticism. And then they pick up some of the old ideas from the Middle Ages with the Roman Catholic Church, like doing labyrinth prayers, where you have some sort of physical activity, again, to somewhat enhance the mystical experience, and then have feelings from within that become more important than what the Bible might actually say. Now, just one warning about postmodernism. This is not just philosophy and Christian, but it eventually affected every discipline, literature, architecture, music, to where they tried to apply these ideas that there is no absolute, there are no truth, kind of do your own thing. Come into a concert and every instrument is playing whatever they want to play. They're not following a score. And then they sit back and say, oh, wasn't that meaningful? Wasn't that wonderful? Well, I just have to love it when we as Christians who should know better get caught up in this. And I was reading about one of the early conferences with the emerging church as they were trying to apply some of this postmodernism stuff. And they decided to keep the room lights low to kind of enhance the feeling. They had these strange videos playing on the wall, kind of nonsensical, just scenes randomly flittering on the wall. They had couches, but they were all at random organizations, so you're not facing the lectern where the expert's going to be up there lecturing on postmodernism and the emerging church. And meanwhile, everyone's kind of doing their own thing, drinking their own drinks, on their cell phones, talking to each other, walking in and out, while the poor guy's up there trying to give his lecture. And eventually the emerging church experts, at least in this one particular situation, concluded that if you're going to be the speaker in one of these things, we got to change the rules to make it more organized than what we otherwise want to run our church services as.
Wow. Whew. All right. Dr. Caner, why do I need to know about worldviews like Islam, especially at a Bible school?
I've been asked this question a lot. In fact, from moms and dads, why would you let my kid read the Quran? Because that's when I'm in class here at Word of Life or wherever else I'm teaching, there's some nervousness about it. And what I would tell you is those who like to drink milk don't like meat. Those who eat meat want more. And the issue that you have is a worrisome individual of maturation. And so what I would tell you is unless you're settled in your faith, that's a good question. But part of being settled in your faith is becoming like the scripture asks us to be, in persuasive and recognition of others' belief system, in order that you would, for Islam, compare and contrast it and the joy that it brings when you're able to win a Muslim to Christ. When you're at a worldview like Islam, which, by the way, is much like Deism, because Allah never visits. He is completely transcendent. He is not immanent. When you study such things, you then start recognizing, you know what, there's a good way to witness to a Muslim knowing what they believe. In fact, the only time I've ever seen a Muslim walk out on a debate is when a Christian scholar asked a Muslim scholar, when was the last time you had an intimate personal encounter with God? And it so flustered the Muslim that he walked backstage and would not come back. So realizing people's heads, I tell students this in class here, what I'm going to teach you in Islam is supplemental. It's not essential. They overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. But nonetheless, it is important so that you can get to someone's head and to someone's heart. And so worldviews, where you walk and where you go, everyone has one. And your job is to share and break through that worldview with the person of Jesus Christ.
So are you up for some questions? Sure. All right. I'd like you to pull up your thesis statement that you submitted last week, or at least that you should have ready for class in the 11 o'clock, the next session, next period. Take a look at your thesis statement. Consider what you have just heard. And then if you have a question for, not me, anyone else up here, go ahead and raise your hand and ask those questions once you have reviewed where you're headed with your thesis, and based on what we discussed today, what questions you have. Ryan, I'll repeat it so that they can hear. Oh. So can I, authority.
Postmodernism deal with authority?
I'll repeat that for the video too. He essentially asked, how does postmodernism deal with authority if there's no absolutes?
Right. Well, I think that's the problem. They don't. There is no acceptable authority. So it then becomes a very degenerative situation in society. I've never tried this myself, but I thought that if you're ever involved in a discussion with someone who was from a postmodern position, ask them to see their wallet. And when they get the wallet out, just grab it and start walking away as fast as you can. Because obviously they're going to run after you and say, hey, you can't do that, that's mine. And you answer, well, on whose authority? If I want it, it's mine, I'm just going to take it and run. So that becomes, it's a self-defeating proposition when you say there is no truth, but the truth that there is no truth.
Although if you did that to a college student, you wouldn't really gain much much money. They'd probably just let you keep running.
Well, at Truett, McConnell, they probably would.
Yeah. Okay, next question. Yep. Go ahead. Yeah. So would a postmodernist believe that life has any kind of purpose?
I know more about existentialism. I do postmodernism. And within existentialism, it was a very depressing philosophy, because they would say, if it feels good, do it.
Right.
There are no absolutes. Go for all the gusto. Don't worry about yesterday. Don't worry about tomorrow. And so that sounds good, you know. But then they followed up with honestly saying, you can do whatever you want and no one can criticize you, but there's no guarantee it's going to make you feel good. And I think I shared in class the other day, one of the psychologists from that particular thought said, the only thing that can bring happiness is death. But don't commit suicide because we can't be sure.
Right.
So it's
No
very depressing.
absolutes. Right here. How, if at all, is the relationship with Allah strictly fear-based?
Yeah, if you look, there are 99 names of Allah. That if you ever see Muslim with beads around them, that's the 99 names, and they're reciting them. And when you count them, his sovereignty and his terror are the majority of those names. And when you count more than that, there's a great verse in the Quran that helps you understand that sovereignty to a Muslim is not sovereignty to a Christian. We can have our debates on predestination and things of this nature. Has nothing to do with Islam. And here's why. Chapter 4 and verse 78 of the Quran says, if anything good befalls you, it's from Allah. If anything evil befalls you, it's from Allah. And so the fear comes with all of your life. There is no such thing as a fall. There are no fallen angels. There's no fallen man. Adam and Eve were simply deceived. They are weak. They are forgetful. But they are not lost. They do not need to be saved, which means anything that happens in your life, all goodness and all evil are from the mind of Allah. So if you wake up this morning and go to the doctor and you get cancer, it is from Allah. If he judges you, it's from Allah. That is most particular with your salvation. They don't believe in salvation because you don't need to be saved. They call it guidance. And they have guidance based on three things. According to chapter 25, verse 70 of the Quran, you have to repent, you have to believe, and you have to work. Chapter 17 and verse 13 of the Quran says that work is fastened around your neck. Consider the imagery there. And that one day you'll stand before Allah, chapter 23 of the Quran, in verse 101, and you'll look at him, and he'll weigh your good and he'll weigh your bad. And if he wants you, because you can be the best Muslim and go to hell or the worst Muslim and go to heaven, because it's all on his arbitrary nature. If he wants you, chapter 14 of the Quran says Allah leads astray whomever he pleases, then you go to paradise. So everything is fear-based because you just don't know his will. And if doing good is easy, he probably likes you. If it's hard, he probably doesn't. And all of the superstitions that go with that, there are far more things that send you to hell that ever send you to heaven. In Islam, I'll do a lecture tomorrow on this, on the things that send you to hell, which you can imagine some of them. Murder, okay, send you to hell. Unintentional killing, send you to hell. Stubbornness, send you to hell. Greed sends you to hell. Women are more in hell than men because they are ungrateful to their husbands. Being mean to a cat sends you to hell. Urinating on yourself sends you to hell. And you start listening to this and going, when does this end? Never. Because Allah, though most beneficent and merciful, is a terror God.
Natalie, is that your comparison? Are you doing the focus on fear? Okay, good. I like that. I saw another hand. I thought around here, maybe not. Okay, Katie? Is it true that there are peaceful Muslims versus extremists? Is that correct?
Yeah, here's the easy way to understand that. The more literally they take the Quran, the more militant they'll be. The more allegorical they take the Quran, the more peaceful they will be. Because how else, going back to the terror question now, using it with your question on really what's jihad and so forth, where in chapter 8 of the Quran, verse 12, it says, strip the fingers from the hands that you may put fear inside the infidel. Right? There's an issue to that where to an allegorically based Muslim, a modern Muslim, that is historical, but to a traditional Muslim, that is for today. I'll add one other thing that, a lot of Muslims are peaceful in the West, right? Because they come over here, they sense the freedom. Only 1 out of 3 go to a mosque when they're in America, so consider that. But also add that idea of peace is relative. When Fox News did a survey, do you believe in the First Amendment? Do you believe someone should say something wrong about Muhammad? What happens? 58% of Muslims in America said it should be illegal and you should be arrested and put in prison. So even when they say they're peaceful, they want laws against it. And perhaps the greatest way to see it is sadly through religious liberty. In the Quran, chapter 3 and verse 85, it says, if you accept another religion, it will not be accepted of you. In what Muhammad would say later on is if a Muslim changes his Islamic religion, kill him. And in places like Egypt, 85% of Egyptians believe anybody who leaves the faith should be put to death. That number is closer to 100% in Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and other countries. So if you saw that video last week with me on Huckabee, if I were saved here as I was, I'm protected because of men and women who have died for my freedom for 200 years. But if I were in Pakistan or in Saudi Arabia or a host of other countries, I probably wouldn't be here. So there's 2 different sides of that peaceful question.
Good. Lots of questions. Yeah, right here. Yep. Aside from a prophet like Muhammad, who else is Jesus Christ to a Muslim?
Yes. Okay. So how to shorten this?
This is actually a good question because quite a few of them their thesis is comparing who
Okay.
Jesus is from a biblical worldview verse. Is that correct for those of you writing on Islam? Yeah,
So if you're writing on it, obviously I would tell you as a trained historian that primary sources are most important. So here's what I'm going to tell you to do, then I'll give you the answer a little bit. One, in the Quran, Jesus is mentioned in 93 verses. Most definitely in chapters 3, 4, and 5, there's a hint. But you can also go to hadithcollections.com, Hadith, collections.com, type in Jesus, and you can see him every time he's mentioned in the second source of authority in Islam, which is called the traditions, the Sunnah, the example of Muhammad, written 200 years, compiled really, 200 years after Muhammad died. And you can find out that Jesus looks like an Irish guy. He's got red hair, he's medium height, and he's shorter than some of the Old Testament prophets. And it goes from there. Have fun with that, because apparently Jesus is not as tall as me. But they have all sorts of issues. So in Islam, Jesus is created, we talked about. But you have to understand that Jesus was a Muslim, according to chapter 3, and the disciples were Muslim. And oh, by the way, so is Adam and Abraham and David. They change all of history. The crucial aspect you have to deal with is that he didn't die on the cross, but verse 158 of chapter 4 says, but it was someone like him. Who's the someone like him? Because when I got saved, nobody showed me the glamour shot of Jesus from AD 33. So how do they know it's someone like him? And there's no explanation to that. That'd be fascinating for the paper. As well as he's a mere messenger that you talked about. He's one of the great prophets. One other verse, just to help you, is chapter 43 and verse 61. Jesus is coming back. Jesus is coming back. And so there's a whole lot more that goes into that, but Jesus is going to come back, and then he's going to die and be buried alongside of that great prophet, Muhammad.
Are there any questions on deism? Because we haven't. Okay, Matt? How do they believe there's an afterlife if they believe in one at all? What in nature points to an afterlife, if that's what they're dependent upon?
So that's the problem. There is no real absolute authority, like postmodernism. There's no absolute authority by which they base anything. And the teachings I mentioned of Herbert, Edward Herbert, really comes out of his Christian background, that he gets some of these concepts of ethics and the afterlife. So it's really... that's why deism didn't survive very much. You don't find many deists today because the system doesn't work. So there's no basis for that conclusion from science, from nature. So it's an illogical conclusion. I would just add, you can pray for Anthony Flew. One of the flaws we mentioned, the flaw is that he's gone a big step from atheism to theism, or soft deism, as he calls it, but that's a big step. He's looked at creation around and points to Creator, but that's not enough. He needs to know Christ as his Savior. So pray for Anthony Flew.
Can I add I had students read this when I taught History of Ideas. If you haven't read A Natural History of Religion by David Hume, that'll give you some answers. It was published between 1794 and 1807 by its final article. That will help you as well in terms of studying it, because you strip miracles away from everything, and they're trying to find a way, exactly as you point, with the difficulty. And what they'll try to do is add some Platonism in there. Plato, of course, being a philosopher, Plato would say, the way you can find out about heaven is look to things down earth and figure out the perfection of such. And they try to invent that, right? If there's a chair here, there's chairness in heaven and the perfection. And they then blend. It almost becomes a pluralistic religion.
Can you say that title one more time for them?
A Natural History of Religion, David Hume. Also, as well, of course, the paramount perennials, Thomas Paine's The Age of Reason, 1757 for that one.
Annie. Okay. Dr. Weaver. What do deists believe the role of God is currently? That basically is the question, right? What do they believe his role is currently?
It really has no role, right? He's transcendent. He's not personal. He's not relational. He doesn't want to interact with man. Man can't interact with him. So he's just that that watchmaker that created the watch, but then lets the watch work on its own based upon the laws he created.
Does that answer? I know there was more to it, but what was the rest of it? So is he just sitting in heaven? What is their
They
image
don't know.
of them?
We
They
can't
don't
know because science doesn't tell us that, and creation doesn't tell us that. So
But they would believe that he exists, that he
Right.
is alive. But
yeah.
yeah,
And of course, deism really influenced Harvard and Yale in the early days, well, in the later days, and it turned into universalism and Unitarianism, this idea that everyone gets saved. So that became the trend out of deism.
sure. Yep, good. Luke.
For deists, would they believe that God is involved in and or created the afterlife?
Well, again, there's no creed for deism, and there's no religious leaders for deism. So I listed for you 5 teachings by the father of deism. So there's no monolithic view or creedal statement. So it could vary from person to person, I imagine.
What was your question? Sorry.
It was kind of similar. So it's like, when I was doing research, it said, like, they don't believe in the Trinity, so obviously, like, they don't believe in things. But then they do believe in, like, an afterlife. But is there, like, salvation, like, redemption? Like, do they believe they're all going to heaven or all going to hell?
So is there salvation or redemption in the afterlife?
Well, Herbert believed that his 5th point that he held to was that there are consequences for our life now. So again, they want the ethical morality of Christianity, but none of the accountability and even the objective basis for what is moral. So, as you know, one of the issues as we talk about deism, and I think there's a lot of revisionism in our history of, the secularists want to say that all of our fathers of the foundation of America were deists. Benjamin Franklin, George Washington. The 2 articles I referred to you will give you a take on that, but Kirby Anderson argues that George Washington was not a deist and records some of the statements of George Washington's daughter and things like that. So it's a desire to maintain the moral, ethical guidelines that are necessary for society to function well without having the accountability to God. So yeah, they embedded in that 5th point of Herbert is that your actions in this life has consequences in the next life for good or bad, reward or penalty. But that's beyond that. They can't know more and don't know more, but that's his position. But again, I think it's more for the society to function than a conviction necessarily of his own.
What about within postmodernism, the idea of afterlife or redemption, or what's their view of what happens after this?
In postmodernism, it started as a philosophical system that probably came out of atheism to begin with. So I would imagine that most early postmodernist thinkers were atheistic to where they didn't think there was an afterlife. Of course, once it gets absorbed into the church, some people try to make a distinction between the emerging church, which they feel is a little more evangelical and therefore would still accept the deity of Christ and the blood atonement and salvation by faith and faith alone, whereas the emergent church is a little further and maybe even started more towards liberalism, which has a doubt of the supernatural. Although I think even within Christian liberalism, many times they still think in terms of the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, and we're all going to wind up in a happy place when it's all done.
Yeah. Well, that is all we have. I know you have questions, but that is really all we have time for. Can you please thank these men for their time? Thank you so much. Hopefully, this has helped your thinking and your guidance as you work through your papers and think about the direction, and then importantly, think about the sources that you are finding. Remember, we talked last week, we're not just doing a Google search, and some of you mentioned that today too. It's not just the first thing that pops up because it's most likely not credible, or it has a hidden agenda for what they want you to see. So, Thank you for your attention. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time, and we will take a break. You're dismissed.